Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of FireDEV, a fireside chat with people in the industry. Today, my guest is Andrés Ortiz Suárez. Andrés, how are you doing?
Doing all right. How about you?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. It's where I am. It's almost 5 p.m. in the UK. It's getting dark. Obviously, it's that time of the year where 4 5 starts to get dark, and it's resembling like 10 11. Summertime.
Yeah. Same thing
Um,
happens over here
yeah. So, well, where are you based again?
in Austin, Texas.
In Texas. Okay, so a similar thing then. Well, what's the weather like there right now?
It's getting colder, but we've also had the hottest summer on record ever.
Okay.
So it's slightly welcome. I don't like the cold though. I'm not a cold person, so I prefer warm, but then there's too warm. So it's a balance. I don't know.
Oh yeah, yeah. I know what you mean. There's like high 20s to 30. I mean, in terms of degrees Celsius, obviously
Yeah.
Fahrenheit's a bit different. But yeah, for high 20s to 30 is it's that nice mark where it's warm, it's hot. You can sit outside in a t-shirt and shorts, walk around. You'll get a bit of a sweat on, but it's not 40 or 45 or high 30s where you're just like, Jesus Christ, like doing anything is just like too much. You just don't
Yeah.
enjoy it.
Yeah, and if you go to LA and it's 25 degrees Celsius all year round, it's something else.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's lucky for them. I heard it rains very, very rarely over there.
Yeah, very. Like they don't even know what clouds look like sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, over in Texas, does it snow and rain much?
Very rarely.
Very rarely as well.
It does rain. We have wet seasons, so some months throughout the year there's a lot of rain. It can get pretty muggy, but most of the time it's fairly dry, and then it snows once every couple of years at most.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. Then yeah, obviously, I'm sure you've heard about UK weather, which isn't the best. Even this year's summer, I don't think you could call it a summer. It was that bad. It was just terrible. So the weather in the UK, that's one of the things that leaves a lot to be desired. Uh, I feel like many people that do move away from England, one of the main reasons is definitely the weather.
Here it's very wet.
Yes, that's just like guaranteed. And the other thing is, even if you get a good day, there's no guarantee that the day's gonna stay good. Like you're bound to get some rain in there as well. Like that's the other issue.
Oh, this is reliable. It's a reliable rain.
Yeah, like it's reliably unreliable
Perfect.
in terms of the summer. But yeah, it's one of those things. But yeah, talking more about you now. You're the guest today, and you're a programmer within the gaming industry. You worked on at a variety of companies. One of the ones that stands out to me was Naughty Dog. You're the UI programmer, and you was there for a couple of years, a few years back. Do you want to? Should we start there? What did you do at Naughty Dog?
Sure. I was hired on pretty early in my career as a UI programmer scripter when I started. It was a lot of working in Flash, actually, just trying to
What,
mock
Adobe
up.
Flash?
Yeah, Adobe Flash. We were using Flash for our UI on Uncharted 4. It was an experiment to see whether or not we could give artists more tools to be able to develop animations and UI behaviors within Flash, and then use an emulation layer in the game to play back the Flash animations. So that was a pretty big push, and I was really involved, as were a bunch of really, really smart programmers that were way better than I was. Dan Liebgold, uh, uh, Jason Gregory. A lot of people helped out a lot. Like I was not in charge of the whole thing. There was a lot of things that I was pretty junior for, but it was a really amazing opportunity to get to work with really talented, smart programmers, some of the best in the industry, and learn from them and see how they did things and how they thought about problems. It was a really great experience.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, definitely Naughty Dog will have some of the best talent, there is around, and not just within the gaming industry. I would say just, let's say, programmers in general, artists in general. Like you experience their game, because that's what it is. You're sometimes less playing it and more experiencing it. They've definitely found that balance between, okay, this is something I'm gonna play, this is something I'm gonna watch, and ultimately it's gonna be an experience.
Mhm.
And that's definitely one of the things I noticed with their game. Then it's rarity that a studio can pull this off, when you love playing it, but you also love it when there's a cutscene. For a
Yeah.
different reason, but you're engaged still. Whereas there's other games where there's a cutscene you even want to skip, or you're like, okay, I'll watch it because I want to know. I want all the context, for the story. But the sooner it's over, the better. Like, I want to get back to the action. Whereas with Uncharted, it's like, oh, the cutscene, this is gonna be good. So they definitely have that balance. But going back to the Flash side, that's something that surprised me. I never heard that Naughty Dog did that, because you was, according to your LinkedIn, you was there from 2014 to 2016, and again, Uncharted 4 being obviously not the latest, because obviously you got the Lost Legacy collection, and
Yeah.
then was it Lost Legacy, the one with Chloe
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Nadine?
That's it. That's the
Yeah,
last one.
yeah, Lost Legacy. But out to the main ones, Uncharted 4 is the latest one. It was on PS4 as well. By then, I would have thought that Flash was dead and buried, because especially if you look at it from the perspective of mobile devices, it's all gone on to stuff like JavaScript and other web technologies. So why was Flash used? And do you know if Flash was used in the other games, or was this just merely an experiment?
I don't know if Flash was used in future games. I know that was probably used on Lost Legacy because it wouldn't have made sense to make new technology.
Hmm.
In fact, some of my UI bugs from Uncharted 4 were in Lost Legacy. They're my fault. Sorry. Um, uh, so I know that they kept using the same tech for Lost Legacy, but afterwards, I don't see a reason they would have stayed on Flash. Adobe seemed pretty keen on eliminating Flash as a format.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just needed to cough.
Carry on.
Uh, but the idea was at the time when we made the choice to use Flash, it was still a strong format. People were still using it, even though Apple was pushing to remove it from their devices. A lot of people still used it to make animations and small games. And Scaleform was still a very popular technology at the time as well. We experimented some with Scaleform. We didn't go that route. Um, but we ultimately were trying to find ways to just make it easier. And I think that that's the point of the experiment, and the point of continuing to try new technologies is to accelerate your team members and figure out what can we do to make it easier for them to produce content.
Yeah, I mean, that makes total sense, because Flash may not have been suitable for like you mentioned, for iPhone, for Android, for mobile devices, but you will obviously very popular with animators and within the industry. So yeah, I can understand why they had to look at it. And when we're thinking back, 2014 is almost a decade ago. So though
Oh my God.
yes, things were, I guess, wrapping up for Flash, it still probably wasn't 100% clear that, okay, Flash is definitely going to go, and it's going to go for every single platform out there. So yeah, I understand that being something to experiment with. Do you know if Naughty Dog still uses it, and other companies, or is that something that is literally not used at all now?
I don't know. I doubt it. A lot of companies are trying to go to new technologies like HTML5.
Okay, and like, would they use HTML5 as a technology within a video game like
The
Uncharted 4?
HTML, well, the way I would describe it is that HTML5 is the preview. So you use HTML5 language and you see how it renders in HTML5. But once you get into the game engine, that converts into a translation layer, kind of like you would have a scripting language and you would
Ah,
have an interpreter inside the C++ application that would then interpret what the language is. It's not that you are literally rendering HTML5, it's that you're rendering an approximation of what that would look like.
yeah, makes sense. Yeah, because I was going to say that, as a programmer myself, I can't imagine them using HTML in a AAA game on, like, the PlayStation or on Xbox for UI. And I was also thinking, outside of using some sort of web view, how could that even be done? But that makes sense. They're using it for displaying, for testing, and then they're, like you said, some sort of abstraction layer, translation layer that'll translate it to the C++ UI framework, which that'll have. And that's fair enough. Oh, okay. I mean, that's definitely interesting. And why do you think that route has been chosen? Because I'm guessing probably many other companies do something similar as well, not just Naughty Dog. And instead of building the UI directly in C++ or C, using a UI framework, whether it's off the shelf or their own custom framework.
Because frankly, UI designers and UX designers aren't programmers and they shouldn't have to be.
Okay.
That's the simple part of
Mhm.
it. Is most of the time when a UI artist or UI UX designer sits down and tries to figure out how UI works, they do mockups in PowerPoint or in
Mhm.
Illustrator. They're thinking about how it looks, how it feels, and they're not trying to implement it. When a programmer gets to it, they have to then translate everything that the designer wrote into their spec document and into their mock-up and in their um, animation that they built in After Effects, and we have to make that as close to what they want as possible. So the closer that we can get to the tools, the closer the UI artist and the UX designer can get to the tools, the more they can influence the content themselves, and the more they can do without the help of a programmer.
Okay, so it's basically, it allows them to code without having to be a hardcore coder. They can do a bit of HTML, which isn't too hard to pick up, do a bit of CSS, and style it. Plus, their tools like Adobe Photo, I think pretty sure Photoshop does it, probably Illustrator as well, allows you to output HTML as well. So I'm guessing that's probably a stage that allows them to get to the point where they can hand the mock up over to you. But like you're saying, they get closer to the lower level without having to touch the C++. Okay, yeah, that's fair enough. I think that makes sense.
And
Obviously.
sure. And HTML5 has rendering canvases and more
Mhm.
advanced features that allow you to basically be able to build in-house tools that let, designers create buttons that can be clicked, that can do things, and then you translate that into your game engine. So there are ways to do that with off-the-shelf uh, UI frameworks. There's ways to do that if you're building your own. Um, and there's ways to just build entire games out of that sort of thing. So, an example being hacks uh, in heaps.io, which is kind of a small game engine built in hacks, has HTML5 rendering capabilities. So you script your game in hacks and then it translates that into JavaScript and HTML5.
Okay, fair enough. So with a game like Uncharted 4, how many people would work on the UI side of it?
It depends on your budget. Uncharted 4 surprisingly is a smaller team than people would think. Some studios have thousands of people working for them. Uncharted 4 was made with like 400, maybe 500 people, and 200 of those were contract or external. So internally, Naughty Dog had around 300 employees at the time, which meant that the people working on UI were me and the UI artist Alex Neonike, and that was it. Uh, uh, so we had a lot of help and support from the rest of the programming team. and at times we had to recruit different programmers to set up different pages at the very end of Uncharted 4. We had a lot of UI pages to implement, and we were just, let's get every programmer working on at least one UI page to try to knock them all out. Thank you to all of the programmers for helping with that. And we had to get help from the concept artists to make icons and art that would go into the UI. But largely, for a lot of the project, it was just me and Alex figuring that out and working with the multiplayer team also to do the UI for them.
Okay. So when you're, building this out, because you said you would bring in other programmers from other, teams, was it a matter of, okay, you've got it set up, would you create documentation and maybe videos to help them understand how to do it based on what you and Alex has established, so they can just, okay, get a mock up, use your guidelines and get it created? Like, how would that work?
Yeah, it was oftentimes spec documents. Sometimes they would be more detailed, sometimes they would be very loose about what needs to go into a particular page, what the information needs to be, how do we populate it. We would have mockups that we would show that say, like, here's the information, here's the data we want populated, and we would let them figure out how to set it up. A lot of the Naughty Dog employees were the programmers are really, really capable and don't need a lot of instruction. You can just show them a problem and they already kind of have a good idea about how to fix it. And if they're not sure, there's a lot of examples that we already had in code of ways that we had set up other screens, so they would have something to pull from.
Okay, so you spoke to the the caliber of obviously the talent that's at Naughty Dog. What's the interview process like? Obviously you've gone through it, you've worked there. What was the interview process like? What was the things that they definitely are looking for, and if you don't have, it's just definitely a no. And what you know advice would you give to someone that's maybe looking to work at a company like Naughty Dog?
That was very intimidating. They want you to be a programmer at the top of your game. I was in the rare circumstance where I was not at the top of my game, but I had a unique skill set because I was very well versed in Flash, and they were looking for somebody who could do ActionScript in Flash. And so I could answer some of their questions, and some of them I just didn't really know. They were looking for generally, when Naughty Dog is looking for a programmer, they will want to make sure that they understand the fundamentals very well and that they understand the whys of things. Like, why are things done the way that they are? An example being, like, they want you to know what 2 to the power of 8 is, and they want you to know why that matters. And I'm not going to give you the answer because I think that it's important for you to research that answer and figure that out for yourself. And that's the kind of thing that they want you to have internalized. So when you go to the interview, there's a lot of things that you just kind of inherently know. There's a lot of things that you're prepared for. They want you to be the kind of programmer that can, like, understands the, like, engine and code deeply, because a lot of being a Naughty Dog programmer is about having responsibility for a lot of things. Very few junior programmers are there without being given a lot of responsibility immediately. You have the ability to make the game crash at any point, so you have to make sure to keep it stable. You have to make sure to try to check in good code. You have to make sure to communicate. You have to make sure that you own your section of the code and that it is up to par. And I think over time working at Naughty Dog, I started to pick up on a lot of those skills. And at one point, they were saying, "Hey, we might have you interview as a programmer to join, like, the programming team at large." And at that point, I was trying to figure out whether or not I wanted to stay at Naughty Dog and keep working on the next game. I made the decision to move on, partly because I was scared of the interview process, and partly because I wanted to see what smaller studios were like and try something different. And looking back on it, I think that now I could probably pass that process. I could maybe have passed it back when I was leaving Naughty Dog as well. But I think I have learned a lot leaving Naughty Dog and trying out different studios to see how other people make games in different ways.
So, like, is that something that you would like to go back to a bigger studio like Naughty Dog, or because obviously we'll talk about your experience post Naughty Dog in a second, or have you just fallen in love with these, not the indie side, I guess, but the smaller studios compared to Naughty Dog?
I think there's something very cool about being at a bigger studio.
Hmm.
And there's parts of me that want to be at a bigger studio so I can make something really big and ambitious. But also, I think that once you get to a point where you're making a game that large, there are fewer risks that you can take. You have to be a little bit more safe. You have to
Hmm.
make something more accessible. People talk a lot about how like Uncharted and The Last of Us are so revolutionary, and they are from a storytelling perspective, but as games that you play are very safe. They're very approachable, and they go to great lengths to make sure they're approachable and that they have a wide appeal. They spend a lot of time making sure there's accessibility features so that a lot of different people can play, and they make sure that the player never feels lost so that
Yeah.
that way they always can keep playing. And I think that I'm interested in trying to tell stories in games that are more challenging, that maybe won't have as wide appeal. And that doesn't mean like not have accessibility features. It doesn't mean not want to make sure that a lot of people can enjoy it. But I think that they're not going to wind up being very cinematic Hollywood style games that are third person shooters. I think I'm interested in text based adventure games and RPGs and card battlers and a lot of games that would probably center more in the indie space because they're so interesting and experimental and they shake up how we perceive narrative and how gameplay can reflect real world conflict.
Yeah, I mean, that's something I remember we discussed off camera as well when we first, spoke. Is one of the problems with bigger studios is even in roles that are generally considered creative and very, free flowing, let's say, an artist, for example, if you're in a big studio on a pre-established franchise like Uncharted. Obviously, on Uncharted 4, it's the fourth one in the franchise. If you're excluding the one on PS Vita, so the fourth major one in the franchise. By that point, they know how Sully looks. They know how Nate looks. They know how they interact. They know the overall, pacing for the story. They know what they can and can't do, in terms of the lore and the universe of Uncharted. So yeah, when you come in there, I think for a lot of people it might sound exciting, and I think it is for many people. But if you're listening and you're thinking, I'm going to go to a big studio and I'm going to put my mark and do something really creative on on Uncharted, on The Last of Us, on Halo, on Gears of War, on these big games, in reality, you're probably not. You're gonna have a spec, some sort of mock-up, some sort of concept given by somebody, especially if you're a programmer, and that's what you're gonna have to do. And you can't just be suddenly changing things. And obviously, at a smaller studio, I guess you have a bit more, creativity, freedom with your creativity, and maybe even your suggestions can be implemented versus on something like Uncharted. It is the way it is.
Yeah. On a larger studio, if there is maybe one feature that you want to fight for and get implemented, you might be able to do that on the project. But at indie studios, you might be able to sell people on a lot of features because there's so many fewer hands and so many fewer heads. It's a lot easier to get other people to agree, to get buy in for your
Mhm.
idea. That said, it's not that being at a big studio is not creative. It's that it's a different kind of creative. You're solving specific problems that are given to you or that are presented to you instead of coming up with new ideas that people haven't seen before. And sometimes you might come up with new ideas people haven't seen before in a big studio. Sometimes that's part of the project that you're making is you have this, like, your director or like the studio has decided to make this game that nobody's ever seen, and that gives you a lot of opportunity to experiment and do new things. But ultimately, it's a different kind of creativity because it needs to be solving specific problems. And at an independent studio, they are trying to express an idea. A lot of times, they have an idea that they have and they want to express that in some way. They have a limited amount of budget and they're open to whatever it's going to take to get that idea across. That's what's exciting, I think, about working at an indie studio. It's a lot more unstable. It's a lot more difficult to maintain work life balance. Uh, it really takes a lot of discipline on behalf of leadership to make sure that the employees are taken care of and that they are taking care of themselves and that they are, putting their life first and not just sinking hundreds of hours into work every week. But I think that you can make really special things that really influence games that are bigger than them later on because they were so innovative and so creative.
Yeah, it- it's those type of studios that can get to the point of a Naughty Dog, to the point where it's an established brand, an established studio that has an established franchise as well. But obviously, they go through those teething pains when they're in their infancy, and it's definitely a heavy balancing act between everyone involved. Before we move on to the studios that you worked on post Naughty Dog, one last question about Naughty Dog. You mentioned there was a bug in Uncharted, the menu, and then you said it carried over to Lost Legacy. What was that UI bug, and is it still in there? Do you know?
I don't know if it's still in there. I bet it still is. Sometimes you will be uh, playing through Uncharted Lost Legacy or Uncharted 4, and you will get, I think, a notification, like a quest or objective notification, and it will stay stuck on screen. That is my fault, and I don't know. I never was able to fix it. I never figured out what was wrong.
I'm trying to think if that ever, because I played Uncharted 4 two, 3 times on PS4, Lost Legacy twice on PS4, on PS5 again. I don't know if the how much of that ported over, of the code from PS4, but I'm guessing a fair bit because it's similar architecture. On PS5, I played it once, I think, for each one. I mean, maybe I noticed it. I'm guessing it wasn't a bug that appeared that often, because otherwise they probably would have patched it up.
Yeah, they probably would have tried harder to find it, but I got it when I was playing Lost Legacy once, and so I would. That's how I know it was there. But outside of that, it's probably very rare. And if anybody saw it, shout out to you.
So post Naughty Dog, what other studios have you worked at, and what games as well?
Post Naughty Dog, I joined indie studio named Airship Syndicate. They're currently here in Austin, Texas, still, and they're working right now on a live service game called Wayfinder. At Airship Syndicate, I was one of the few programmers on the game Battle Chasers Night War, which is an RPG, JRPG that is kind of more indie, more small. It is kind of like a dungeon crawler, in some ways sort of a roguelike, because every time that you go into the dungeon, they're procedurally generated. There were a lot of interesting things that we tried there. And afterwards, we worked on a title called Darksiders Genesis. It's part of the Darksiders IP. It was a two-player co-op, top-down Darksiders game, if that makes any sense. Still very Darksiders, lots of Zelda-like exploration and combat, but it was obviously online co-op. and you could play two different characters, either War, the character from the original Darksiders, with who has a huge sword and busts things up with his giant fist, uh, and alternately you could play his brother Strife, who has twin guns and a lot of shooting mechanics. Is faster. It's like a basically a ninja. There, that one was a lot of fun to work on. And after that, two other games. I was at Airship Syndicate for from 2016 to 2020, earlier this year, 2023. So that's a good 7 years now, that I was at Airship, and we released 4 games while I was there. So it was a very hectic pace. After Darksiders Genesis, we released another JRPG based a lot on the things that we learned from the original Battle Chasers, with Riot Forge, and that's Ruin King, the League of Legends story. It was much more JRPG like in that it had a very strong story, and it was focused a lot on the kind of the role of characters. It was a lot of wandering through a world. There was no real world map. It was seamless traveling from room to room. You got to explore the League of Legends universe a little bit in Bilgewater and the Shadow Isles. And that one was really awesome to work on. I'm very proud of that one. I got to be lead programmer on that one and lead the programming team, offer a lot of support, learn a lot about what it takes to be a lead. That was a really big challenge. And lastly, at Airship Syndicate, we then turned around to work on Wayfinder, which is a live service MMO light game where you uh, create characters or craft characters instead of like making your own. And so it's a lot about collection and collecting weapons and characters that have unique names and abilities and like leveling them all up.
So what's the main standout differences between working at a bigger studio and a smaller studio, and what's similar that you didn't expect?
The main standout differences are budget. That is the
The
main
obvious one.
standout difference. It will make a huge difference what you can and cannot do based on your budget. At Naughty Dog, it was a given that we would have really elaborate cutscenes and mocap, and we would have lip synced cinematics, and we would have um, a lot of like VO in different languages, and that we would try to do accessibility features for people. At Airship Syndicate, we could not guarantee anything. And so it was a lot of very creative problem solving around what is possible with our budget. What do we think is important for communicating what it is that we want to do? And what can we just leave aside because it's just not worth it? There were a lot of times we would sacrifice things that I didn't want to sacrifice, but it was for the best. It was for the better of the project, for the good of the project, because it really needed to get done, and we didn't have time to do things that didn't serve the end result. So we had to be very lean and scrappy. We had to make a lot of things ourselves. We couldn't buy um, software, third party software, to do a lot of things that might be able to do things for us. We looked into doing like flappy mouths, like the kind of auto generated mouths for cinematics, using very like the most low budget possible audio to VO or audio to facial animation software we could. And we found it just wasn't good enough at that cost. So we just couldn't do it. And there was a lot of that, of trying to figure out how do we make some of these things possible at a game of our budget. I
Yeah.
think. Mhm.
Carry on.
Yeah, well, I can talk about what is similar, but go ahead.
Yeah, I was just about to say, obviously, when you are, at a small studio, having that, those budget, constraints, there are certain things that you can and can't do, and then, you come against those problems where, you have a budget, but what you're getting, it's not good enough either. So you're having to think about, are we having this feature in there? Are we figuring something else, else out? Before you get onto the similarities. So yeah, something like Naughty Dog, they have a bigger budget, but which one was it easier to actually get stuff signed off? Because you hear about big studios, big companies that have a lot of red tape, a lot of bureaucracy, before you can even get a decision actioned. So which one, relative to the size? So obviously with Deck Nine, you'll have a smaller feature, maybe cost less compared to Naughty Dog, but which one was it easy to actually get it signed off on?
That's what's interesting. That's similar. It is
Okay.
actually just as difficult to get things signed off on in a big studio as it is in a small studio. I think that the main difference is when you're at a big studio and you're making a safer game, you're probably just not going to suggest things that are too off the wall because they don't work, they don't fit. You're trying to solve problems and add features that fit the game that you're making. So you internally are already self selecting what you're going to suggest. You're not going to say, hey, in this Call of Duty game, I think that we should add a scene where you go to a parallel dimension and fight cyborgs, because while that sounds really cool, it doesn't fit the Call of Duty franchise, at least not yet. And that means that you're not going to suggest those things right from the beginning. You're going to suggest things that fit the IP. And so as a result, your things that you're fighting for are already much more safe. And then the challenge is trying to get them approved by the game director and your lead and the art team that has to make the art assets and the design team that has to build the levels for that or create characters that they're going to have to balance. There are a lot of people that are affected by the things that you suggest. And sometimes a feature is very small and very safe and it makes a big difference. And that one is just easier to sell to people because you can show it to them and say, this won't require a lot of work. It's very safe. And I think it will make the game experience better. And a lot of people will look at that and say, yeah, I agree. We should get it in. And that's true across all studios. And what's true across all studios as well is that you might show them a feature and they might look at it and say, that's a lot of work for the environment team. That's a lot of work for the design team. That's a lot of work for the programming team. We don't have the time. We don't have the budget. We can't do it.
I mean, yeah, that's definitely interesting to hear that the big studios and the small studios to get things actioned, it's equally difficult. But obviously, like you're saying, there's different reasons, I guess, for the small studio for saying it versus the big studio. One might be budget constraint, one might be more time constraint, as well. I'm guessing with Naughty Dog, when they're obviously you're working on Uncharted 4, when there's release dates either internally set and then eventually externally announced as well, is there more pressure of, okay, we can't really be doing this and this extra, or this in general, because we have this date set? And is with the smaller studios, is it kind of, okay, we're a bit flexible with the date, or are they just as strict?
Nope, you always have a publisher. If you don't have a publisher, that might be different. But I think that even when you don't have a publisher, you're self publishing, you have to be very judicious about what you're doing with your time. You have to be very strict with yourself and have a discipline because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what you are making. It could be the greatest game of all time or it could be shit. And everyone at leadership understands that. What's important isn't that this be the best game you've ever made. What's important is that you finish it and that everyone in the studio gets paid and gets to keep making games. Because if you keep doing what you're doing and you keep growing as a team, eventually you might make the best game you've ever made. But if you make a game and it comes out and maybe it's great, but everyone is burned out, you will not make a game together again. People will just leave.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's definitely the case. Like, you've got to have that balance of, pushing people, getting things done to a high standard, obviously having the deadlines, but then, like you said, it has to be sustainable. It has to be
So,
long term.
yeah. And the deadlines are there not to make sure that you make money. They're there to make sure that you finish the project and that the project can sell and hopefully make back what it costs to make. And that's true if you have a publisher. That's true if you're self-publishing. So you should always have you should always have timelines. They should always be strict at it to a certain point. There is a time for a lot of experimentation, and that is called pre-production. Before you actually start making the game, you figure out what it is that you're making, and you spend time experimenting and trying things and figuring that out. That's the time when you get to be the most flexible, but that is also a time of a lot of analysis paralysis, because there's a lot of different things that you could do, and you're trying to figure out what the best things are. That's hard. It's very hard. And once you get out of pre-production, you have to have a lot of questions answered about what it is that you're going to make, so that way you can tell the people underneath you, okay, here's what we're going to do. Here's how we're going to do it. Here's how much time it's going to take. Get to it. And hopefully they have enough instruction to be able to get it done. So like I said, there's not one type of game studio that's more flexible than others. You might have one type of game that might be more flexible. Like if you're working at Mojang on Minecraft, maybe coming up with the features that players want, or maybe coming up with the next features can be fun, but also you're constantly driven by the feedback from players about what it is that they like, what it is that they don't like. If you're at an indie studio like Supergiant Games working on Hades or Hades 2, you might have a lot of cool ideas for what it is that you can make, but you have a very, very small team. And you know that you have a limited amount of budget and runway to be able to make your next game. And you want it to be very narrative heavy and very emotionally impacting. And you want to have VO and music, and you are trying to build it off of the existing. Hey, there's a lot of different things that are constraints that create those timelines for you. So every studio is going to have different things that are keeping things in balance. And the important thing is to know when something that you are fighting for is really important and you should keep fighting for it, or when something that you're trying to suggest just doesn't fit the timeline, the budget, the IP, whatever. And maybe it's time to let it go and work on the things that are going to make the game better, make sure that it ships on time, and that everybody gets to make another game afterwards.
So, coming off working at a company like Naughty Dog earlier in your career, like, does it hold the weight that people think it does? Like, when you went to the smaller studios, were they like, ooh, Naughty Dog? Or, like, even if they didn't overtly say that, do you feel like that had, helping hand in you getting, through the door, whether it was through the door for an interview or through the door, into the job itself? Or was it just like, okay, you worked at a game studio, fine?
Yes and no. I think that it doesn't make a difference when you are when you don't have a lot of experience. When you don't have a lot of experience, if you've only worked at one place for a year or two, doesn't matter. You don't have a lot of experience. When you show that you have a lot of experience, that's when people look back to see where you worked, because they want to see, okay, where did you work to get this experience? How long were you there? Have you proven that you know what you're talking about and that people want to keep working with you? And that is, I think, the important thing. So I think that trying to get a job at these prestige studios is not a bad thing to do if that's really what you want. If you really just want to work on the next, Last of Us game, try to apply there, try to get there. But It's not going to be the, I just want to work there so that people will look at me and think, oh, great, you've worked at this awesome studio. Because at the end of the day, you might have worked there and you might have made the worst game at that studio. You never know. Like the next project that they work on could be the worst they've ever made. It could be the best they've ever made. I got into Naughty Dog immediately after they shipped The Last of Us Part 1, the very first one. Not Part 1, just the original Last of Us. And I kept feeling the entire time that I was there that I had missed the boat. That everybody was talking about how The Last of Us was their favorite game of all time, that it was so great and so amazing, and the characters. And then they would ask me, what did you do on The Last of Us? And I said, I tested the remaster on PlayStation 4 for a month, and that's the only thing I had to do with it. I didn't work on the original Last of Us, and I felt like I had missed the boat. You're going to feel the same thing if you try to go to a prestige studio. You're not going to have worked on any of the big titles that they've worked on. That is fine. Work at a studio because it gives you the experience you need to be better at your craft. If you're going to get a lot of experience working at a Naughty Dog or a Ubisoft, go for it. Get as much experience as you can. Learn from the people around you. That's what matters. And prove that you can learn and that people want to work with you.
Okay. Yeah, I mean that does make sense. From you know if you've got all those years of experience, yeah, they're gonna be interested in how long was you at different studios, different companies. Which ones did you work at? But if it is just your first one, or maybe earlier in the career, they're probably less interested. And I think that's something for a lot of people to bear in mind. And sometimes instead of just trying to get into that big studio from the start, get that experience in other studios. Sometimes it's a matter of getting several years of experience. One, you get experience, but two, like you said, it shows that you work well enough with people that they kept you around. Like if you were so bad, they probably would have got rid of you. Whereas if
Yeah.
you've been there for 3-4 years, you're probably not that bad. One, either at your job, two, at working with people and like turning up. So
I'd
like
been at
bigger
Naughty
studio,
Dog.
yeah.
Yeah. I had been at Naughty Dog for 2 years, and a lot of independent studios in Austin didn't really wanna talk to me. They wouldn't answer my emails, or they would say, "Okay, come in for an interview." I would interview, and then they would say, "We think you're just not experienced enough for what we're looking for." That's just not going to change no matter where you work.
Okay, so it wasn't a matter of okay, you've worked at Naughty Dog or you've worked at EA, one of these, big studios that obviously have these major titles behind them. It wasn't like okay, we definitely got to have him. It was okay, you've only been in the industry for X number of years. That's not enough for us,
Yeah.
regardless of the company.
Maybe that'll get you an interview, but that won't get you the job. What gets you the job is having the skills and having the portfolio and having the knowledge.
Mhm. And obviously, a lot of that comes from experience. The year, putting the years in, and recruiters at companies know that they know that somebody who's worked 10, 15 years in the industry, but maybe not the biggest studios, but he's consistently been at, let's say, one for 5 years, one for 3 years, one for 4 years, for example, versus for whatever reason, maybe, the person got lucky and ended up working at Xbox for a year. The Xbox one probably isn't going to be as good as the one that's had 15 years of experience being at
Definitely.
studios that, he's been there for several years.
Definitely.
So, what's your academic background? Going into, these studios, small and big, as a programmer, like, did you go to university? So what did you do?
I went to art school. I have an art degree. So let that be a lesson to you. College is not that important. I did enjoy my time at college. I loved learning about art. It made me a very big appreciator of games as a whole. And I feel like I'm a stronger engineer because I understand all of the pieces and how they come together. But I would say the thing that gets you a job isn't your education. It is your ability to produce. And so I find it is oftentimes better to show that you can collaborate with people and make independent projects with other students or other, like if you do game jams and stuff like that, that's an indicator that you can work with a team and you can produce something. Those things are more attractive to people than where you went to school. And so, if you can go to school somewhere where you can get a lot of contact with people and make games, like if that's part of if it's a game degree and there's a lot of collaboration and that's part of the program, making games together, that's fantastic. Do that and don't go into really big debt to do it. It's not worth the debt. Don't do that. I think that it is worth it to try to find opportunities to make games with people.
So, have you ever thought about going indie, like fully? Either yourself, because you've got the programming experience, but you've also got the art background as well. So I'm guessing you can do both sides of it, or like forming a team with a few people. You've worked at these companies, you must have friends and colleagues that you're like, okay, I could work with them.
Yeah, all the time, especially right now when publishers are making things really difficult by constantly pushing for more profit and bigger revenues and shuttering studios or doing layoffs because they can't maintain those profits. That's not healthy. I worry a lot about the state of the industry lately, but I think that what I want before I go indie to start my own studio is a lot of opportunity to see how different studios do leadership and get the opportunity to learn from other leaders, to be able to try to direct games or to be a lead for teams in different ways and experiment with those styles of leadership and see which ones work and which ones don't. I don't want to make myself responsible for a bunch of people's livelihood if I don't feel like I'm up to the task. I want to be a responsible leader. So, learning all of those skills first is paramount to being able to do that. And ultimately, I'm just looking for some place that I can stay there for a long term and that I really like all the people that I work with, that we all agree on what is important in a game. Right now, I'm working at Deck Nine Games. And honestly, all the people there are fantastic. We get along really well. We all agree on like what is important in a game. I could stay here for a long time. It's really up to finding the right team that I feel like I can work with on a long term.
So it's one of those things you think about, but not yet. Like, you want to be in a different position, and when the time's right, it's a transition that you might make.
And maybe not ever. Not everybody wants, like, not everybody winds up making a studio. And just because you're in charge of a studio doesn't mean you get to suddenly make all the things that you've ever wanted.
Mm.
When you start a studio, suddenly you're responsible for a bunch of people being able to pay rent and feed their kids. That's a very big responsibility. You can ask a lot of people about that, like ask Tim Schafer, how did that go? And it's stressful. You don't get to be as creative anymore because now you have to be very responsible and you have to be thinking about making money and bringing in budget and bringing in revenue and figuring out what the studio is going to do next once they're done with this current project. It's a lot of work.
Would you want to go like full indie though? When it's just literally one or two people, or like up to three people, and you're not really responsible for anyone else.
You're always responsible for other people.
I mean, true,
but
you are.
but yeah, I mean, I've done like indie projects in the past, not recently, but I've thought about it a lot, especially with Unity changing their terms of service. It's made me want to try different game engines and experiment with making engines of my own or with experiment with different frameworks that exist and see how difficult would it be to make a game in those engines? How difficult would it be to make tools? Can I build something that lets me rapidly prototype? So that's something I'm experimenting with all the time.
So, what's your go-to engine? You mentioned Unity. If you had to do your own project, what's your go-to engine and other tools in general? for making games?
It really depends on what it is that you want to do. I think Unreal is really great for really high fidelity graphics and really stable gameplay, and they have a lot of robust tools. They have a great suite of utilities for artists and for designers to prototype with and to make art with. It's a fantastic tool, and I love Unreal, but it is also very big. And if you want to make a smaller game, Unreal is not the right tool. I used to use Unity a lot, and I would say Unity is great for if you have a team smaller than 10 people, because it's very flexible and it lets you do whatever it is that you want. But also, it doesn't have any structure. It lets you do whatever you want. And that means if you don't know what you're doing, you might wind up making something that's just unable to stand up on its own. Uh, and I also don't like the new terms of service that Unity's been doing. They're weird, like per install revenue share they're working on. It's very messy, and it makes me not trust Unity as a company. So I don't want to recommend them. I've been trying out different engines on the side to see like which ones are useful. But I think for a lot of artists and game designers, it's going to be really difficult to stray too far out of Unreal and Unity, because you really need to know how to program and build tools for yourself to be able to do all of that prototyping. If you're comfortable coding, there's heaps.io. There's if you like exploring what is Rust, there's what is the name of that? Bevy game engine that's written in Rust. There are Cocos 2D game engine. There's a lot of different frameworks out there that you can use to build something very lightweight, and that can be a lot of fun. I've been prototyping things using those frameworks, but it really depends on what it is that you want to do. Do you just want to make a visual novel? Use one of the pre-built visual novel game makers out there. You want to make an RPG? Use RPG Maker. Don't be afraid of using something that's pre-made. If all you want to do is experiment with an idea, you can get more ambitious as you go. The question is, what is it that you're trying to accomplish? If you're trying to make the world's biggest game and you're just starting out, don't do that. Do not do that. That's not a good idea. You're not going
Definitely
to
good
be
advice.
yeah, you're not going to succeed. Start
Mm,
with experimenting with ideas about, like, I want to see if I can make a game that does this specific thing.
mm.
Do that. Experiment with that. Have fun with it. See if you enjoy it. And then once you're done with that one project, then you have all of that knowledge to make the next one.
Yeah, one of the piece of advice I always give to people that ask about programming, from me, and especially game programming, is if you're at the start or you don't know how to program yet, like just do simple projects. Like do a clone
Yeah.
of a game, like tic tac
Yes.
toe. What's it called, Pong, and then try and build it
Breakout.
up to something like Breakout, then build it up to
Breakout's
Snake,
so good.
Pac
Breakout is a
Man.
great experiment. Yeah. No,
Yeah,
Pac-Man
like
too.
you start to see that okay, Pac-Man's not actually that simple to create once you start, trying to implement the AI, and system for pathfinding as well. If you actually try and do that yourself, you start to realize, oh, this simple game that is what, like 30 years old, 40 years old, is super hard to make on your own.
Yeah.
And if you actually want to do a bit of art as well, like create the art yourself. Obviously Pac-Man and all these games, they have a pre-existing art. You can get it online and you can even get royalty free versions as well, but do it yourself. Like if you want to
It's
go
very
down the route.
easy. Yeah, it's very straightforward, the art that they have, so you
Yeah.
can just mess with it, and
Mm.
it's okay if it looks ugly. It's only you're looking at it. It's fine.
Mm. But you'll also learn a lot as well. Instead of thinking, I want to create this really complex sprite or 3D character model. Do something simple. I don't know how many pixels by how many pixels the artwork in Pac-Man is, but in my head, it's looking very blocky and very, very minimal. So
Yeah.
do that first, and you'll learn about Photoshop. You'll learn about these other tools. Then obviously using the game engine as well, whatever that is. Find some 2D lightweight engine or framework. Another thing I always say to people that have these grandiose ideas of making this and this game that's going to be the next best thing is get set up. Like, sometimes getting the engine or the framework set up can be a day's job or longer sometimes, especially when,
Yeah.
people just think, oh, you're just gonna, it's just gonna work, and it's like, I'll tell you, it doesn't.
No, not immediately.
Unfortunately, it does not. These frameworks that sometimes are made from $1 billion company, used by millions of people on tens of thousands of projects, sometimes can take a few hours to set up, and they'll randomly not work, and you'll be like, "What the hell is going on?" They'll work one day, then the other day they're not working. Those things you want to figure out whilst you're not trying to make the world's best game, whilst you're doing a clone. You can even
Yeah.
release some of those clones on like the Google Play Store, on the Apple App Store as well, to figure out the uploading process, the
Yeah.
certain guidelines that you've got to follow. Figure that out so when you get to actually making your game that you really want to make, all you're doing is making the game instead of
Yeah.
having to figure out all this extra stuff that's generic.
Yeah. So much of what people there's this common misconception, which is that like when you have talent, you just do everything right.
Hmm.
And that's really not true. When you have talent, it means some things make sense to you, but the only way to get good at something is by making a lot of mistakes. And we don't talk about that often enough about how many things we get wrong before we can get things right. And so, you doing small projects is you getting things wrong and being like, I don't know how to do this. Let me learn how. Let me do it and then get it wrong and then figure out how to do it the right way. And then, when you want to do something that you really care about, all you have to do is make it because you've already made all of those mistakes already. So, you're going to be making a lot fewer mistakes.
Oh yeah, like it's definitely something that you have to be tactical, with really start working on something that is manageable, and that's the case if you're making a game. That's the case if you're making, let's say, a website. Again, I always say, make clones. You may release them, you may not release them, but you will learn a lot from it. And not only that, if you're somebody who is new to the industry or new to that, type of work, let's say coding, for example, if you're unsure if that's what you want to do, trust me, you would rather spend a month or two, or let's say 3 months, learning a bit of coding, doing a clone, than spending 2 years making what you think is the best game, and then at the end of it feel like coding isn't for me. Like, that's
Yeah.
the last thing you want to do. So,
Yeah.
make the clone.
Yeah.
Make Pong.
And that you land on something really important there, which is like figuring out what it is that you love to do.
Mm.
Because nobody makes games because they want to make the best game of all time. People
No.
make games because they love to make games and they love specific parts about making games. I don't want to make all of the 3D models in the game. I don't enjoy that very much. I can do some of it. I'm not as good at it as a lot of other people. And I want to hire them to make them for me. But I didn't know that from the start. Learned that because I tried doing it first and figuring out what do I love to do. And then I started doing the things I love to do every day. And now I am always frustrated and stressed, but but I know that I really get excited about the things that I do every day, and I don't just hate my job. I really enjoy my job because it is things that really excite me and make me motivated to work every day. And are you aware of the concept of a master study?
Mm, doesn't ring a bell.
Okay, a master study is something that artists have been doing for hundreds of years, which is they take an original painting by a master, like a Renaissance master,
Mhm.
classical master, and they reproduce it. This is something that you do in art school a lot, in degree program, in degrees programs for fine arts. You will, especially painting majors, you try to reproduce what a master has done before. So you look at like Caravaggio, and you're like, I'm going to make the sculpture just like Caravaggio. Um, the idea there is that you get to go through and try to analyze their work and understand why it was successful and what things they did, what are the details behind it, in order to try to make it as close as possible. And so you have to learn brushstroke techniques and color theory and composition, and you have to understand the medium that you're working with. Is like, am I working with oil paint? Am I working with digital? How am I trying to reproduce this look, and how do I get that exact feel? And that is exactly what you do when you make copies of other games and other pieces of art. Is you are studying what you would consider a master. There is this work that everybody knows, that everybody has played, and you want to understand how it works, how it was made, why it works, what feels good about it, what doesn't. When you put something in, you might be like, the controls feel weird. Why do they feel weird? And you will play and you will start to understand. That is what you're trying to do. And artists have been doing it for hundreds of years. You should be doing the same.
I mean, yeah, that's I guess what I was talking about in terms of doing the clone. But I do love that concept of it, of a master study. And I've never heard of the phrase master study that I can think of, but I've heard that in art school, you will be copying other people's work, and you'll
Yeah.
be trying to get it as accurate as possible. I've heard people doing that, so yeah, that makes sense. I'm trying to think. When I'm still a programmer, but when I was doing programming at university, yeah, there was less of that. Obviously we did do clones. Like we did some. Maybe the AI from Pac-Man, or maybe a Pong, but it was never like, okay, here's a version of Pong, try and replicate it as close to that particular version as possible. And obviously then you get a bit more advanced, do something a bit more. Then also, if you do that enough times, maybe with different variations of different games, but like similar difficulty, you'll refine the process, you'll refine the craft. So like
Yeah.
something that may take 10,000 lines in one project, you figure it out and you can do the game in 5,000 lines, even though it's a similar process. Or you figure out, okay, I'm using C++, I can use object oriented programming, I can start you know, abstracting certain aspects of the game, maybe the UI, I can reuse those components.
Yeah.
That's stuff that you don't want to ideally be learning when you're trying to make your own game. And I feel like it's demotivating when you're trying to make your own game. Whilst learning these concepts, it kind of makes you feel like, oh, I'm not good enough. Whereas if you know that, okay, the gameplay is already figured out, the artwork's already figured out, the mechanics are already done, and they work, I've just got to replicate it. I feel like you're more likely to be okay with the learning process, because
Yeah.
you're not really innovating in the game process, because that's
Yeah.
done years
You're
ago.
not failing at something that you really, really care about. You're failing at learning. Uh, and you're still going to fail when you're working on the game that you care about, but you're going to not be struggling because you're not good enough. The answer is like, am I good enough right now? Is probably no. That's okay. We are usually not good enough for our ambitions, and that's fine. We grow into our ambitions.
Oh yeah, that's something 100% true. We have these ideas. I want to do this, or I want to do that. Just become good at something, and like the way you become good at it is through experience, is through working on it. And I feel like through becoming good at something, you figure out, is that something that you're passionate about? Because people might think, oh, I'm not good at coding, but you might actually love coding. You might have to go through that period of a year or 2 years where it's painful because you don't know anything, and whatever you're doing is either breaking or it's just rubbish. But when you
Yeah.
get through it, you might be like, okay, now that I'm at the point where I'm decent, I actually love it. Vice versa, that might be art. You might find it difficult drawing or using Photoshop, but once you get through that, barrier, you're like, okay, this is something I actually enjoy.
There's a meme that's one of my favorite ones. Is a picture of a programmer staring at a screen, and the text underneath says, "My code is broken, and I don't know why." And then underneath it is the exact same picture, and the text, "My code is working, and I don't know why."
I've seen that. It's
And
so true.
that is it's true. That's an experience a lot of programmers get working on code and learning code and kind of growing. And over time, that is going to be true. And then one day it won't be. One day you will be looking at your code and you'll be like, this isn't working. And you will be able to figure out why it's not working. Or you'll look at it and you'll say, like, yeah, this should work. And it will. That only comes with experience.
Yeah, going from that stage where obviously it's not always gonna be in every scenario, but like you said, you'll be in a moment where it's not working. You're like, okay, I've got an idea why it's not working. It's probably this part of the game. This file, this component. This is what I'm doing. This is where I need to go to. Versus, okay, it's not working. I have no clue of where to go. And
Yep.
you rather have that transitional period, that learning on projects that like I said, you're not that passionate about, and they are purely educational projects.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So what's your favorite video game? Because you clearly love games. What's your favorite?
Oh my god. I think I have two. But I'm going to. I think I'll pick one, and it would be Outer Wilds by Mobius Games. Mobius. I think it's Mobius. Mobius.
Yeah, it might be. I think it is Mobius. Yeah, I mean, it's a game I've heard of. I haven't played it. I've seen a lot about it online. What about Outer Wilds? Makes it an amazing game for you.
Mobius Digital. That's the name. Yes, it is an amazing game. You should play it. Outer Wilds is an experience. It's a game that is more of an experience than a game, I think, which is games are all about resource management and leveling and progression. Like that's the usual fare that you get in a game. Uh, and or alternately it'll be all about the story and like watching cinematics. And Outer Wilds is not about that. Outer Wilds is a game about curiosity and understanding, and the game challenges you to understand its world and what is happening. And in that understanding, you like that is the kind of the goal of the game, and its conclusion can only be achieved once you reach full understanding. That is amazing. And it is an emotional roller coaster. It is sad and beautiful. And it is honestly a kind of a gem of a game that I don't really know how it got made. I've watched the documentary and it just seems like it was an impossible project from the beginning, but somehow they made it work. So it is one of my favorite games of all time. I definitely recommend you play it.
So what sort? Are there any particular documentaries that you recommend for video game? I'm guessing you've come across No Clip on YouTube.
Yes. I mean, everything that NoClip does is really fantastic. They are doing the Lord's work, as they say.
Mm.
A lot of NoClip documentaries really are honest and go into a lot of detail that um, give you really good understanding of what goes on in game development and why things work or don't. There's also a couple of other documentaries I've come across that are really interesting. There's a documentary on uh, the studio that made the Gollum game. What was it?
Yeah, the Golem game. Just looking up myself. What was the studio? It was Dedalic Games or
Daedalic
Dedalic
Games.
Entertainment.
Yes,
Sorry.
there is a documentary on Daedalic Entertainment in German that you can find on YouTube. That is honestly really fantastic documentary about uh, just what Daedalic Entertainment was as a studio, what they were good at, how they struggled, and why the Gollum game got made and what affected its development. It's honestly really sad and frustrating because it seems like they were really, really talented at different things than what Gollum was. And it didn't make sense for them to make this game. They were so much better at other things that a lot of people really loved. And I think that there's a lot of stories like that in the games industry where you'll look at a game and you'll be like, oh, this is horrible. How did this get made? And then you find out the story, and it's really sad because it's a lot of really talented, hardworking people that did their best and tried to do something that they didn't know how to do. They weren't given the resources, they weren't given the right information, the right tools. And that's why that inspires me to try to be a better leader to my teams, because I don't want them to be set up to fail. I want them to be set up to succeed. I want whatever we work on to be the best thing it can be with the team that we have and the resources that we have. And I don't ever want to start working on a project that, like, I know we can't make, or that I know is out of our reach, or that is going to wind up causing a lot of people pain and stress. And I want to make sure that they have lives and they have time to complete everything. It's stories like the ones of Daedalic Entertainment that I think it's really worth a watch, and I think it's very educational about the things to watch out for, and the mistakes that get made in leadership and in publishing, because what studios want, what like companies want, what IP holders want is different from what a game maker wants. And they might have a particular vision in their head about what it is that you're going to make, and you have to be very clear about what can you make, what can your studio produce, what are they good at, and what are they not good at. You're not going to make Assassin's Creed if you're not Ubisoft and you're a tiny 10-person team. That's just not going to happen. It's going to be a different game.
Oh, yeah, 100%. And Gollum, the game, I haven't played it yet, but yeah, I remember when it came out. I remember even seeing the trailers and thinking, this doesn't seem like it's gonna be that good. And then it came out, and the reviews were terrible. It bombed, and obviously, it's for most people out there, most gamers, they're not gonna unfortunately see that side that you're talking about. Especially
Yeah.
in the documentary for Daedalic Entertainment. They're just gonna see, okay, it was a rubbish game for a franchise like Lord of the Rings, and like I said, they're gonna think, how did this ever get made? Considering there have been amazing Lord of the Rings games, like there've been, obviously, you got Shadow of Mordor, those two games. They had. Do you remember what the RPG ones were called back in the day?
Oh my god.
Do you know the one?
I
Those one and two. There's
Yeah,
two of them. Battle
I
for Middle
don't.
Earth.
Battle for Middle Earth. That was like a tactical game, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah,
yes.
yeah.
Sorry, strategy game. Yes, Battle for Middle Earth. Oh my god, those games, and then obviously you had the movie ones, those are Two Towers Fellowship and Return of the King. I remember playing them on PS2, and those games being, good seven, maybe eight, 8 out of 10 games. Like they were, enjoyable games, and they've had other ones as well through, throughout the years. Then this comes out, and it's like, what the hell? I'm gonna have to check out that documentary, and see what it's like. Like, are there any other documentaries outside of No Clip that you would recommend, or YouTube channels that
I
cover
would.
like gaming history and all?
Yes. I support on Patreon the People Make Games Patreon. People Make Games are another group of people making documentaries about games. They are fantastic. They do the work, they do the research. They're very, very small, very independent, and they're interested in understanding complex issues in game development, such as why Steam allows gambling, um, and what happened with Disco Elysium and Zaum. They've done really interesting like documentaries about really complex, crunchy topics that are very long sometimes, but super informational. And sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction, where you really didn't think that things could get as complicated or as weird as they did. But they go really deep to try to understand things and present them in an unbiased way. I really appreciate them, and you should definitely give them a watch.
Okay. Anyone else? Because I always do love, a good documentary, especially about tech and especially about gaming.
I think I think those are the ones that are on the top of my mind. If I think of another one, I'll let you know.
Let me know and I'll put them in the description, for
Sure.
people to check. Have you seen the channel Gamers? I think is it the A is a V?
I have not.
Yeah, so if you check them out, like, I'm literally Googling them now just to make sure that is the one that I'm thinking of. They have some really cool. I mean, I don't know if I would call it documentaries. I mean, I guess you could call it Yeah, gamers with a V for the M, and they have like so, for example, the latest one, the rise and fall of Star Wars Battlefront, and that's 54 minutes long. And then
Ah.
they've got like the rise and fall of Just Cause, 44 minutes long. And then, like why the Wii U was Nintendo's biggest mistake. They do a lot of these rise and fall ones, like rise and fall of Killzone, rise and fall of Bioshock. These are recent ones over the last year, and they really well made. It's like how No Clip, you enjoy listening to the guy's voice. Like, yeah,
Sure.
like part of the documentary is the actual content, the subject matter, and then part of it is the research that's done into it. So what's new about it that you didn't know, but then part of it is just the guy's voice, or the woman's voice, like the person that
Sure.
you're listening to, how entertaining they are. I think partly if their voice is kind of soothing, I think that really helps with a documentary. I don't think you want someone that's really too energetic and intense, trying to get you ready for war. I think a good documentary host, presenter, is one that kind of makes you just sit back and almost feel like you're about to fall asleep, but you want to keep listening.
Yeah, no, I get that. That makes sense.
Yeah, so yeah, Gamers is definitely another one I'll recommend. Other than that, I can't think of anything else, from the top of my head, but there are some, really, good ones. But yeah, No Clip is definitely, up there as well. So, obviously, we're nearing the end of, our podcast, for today. Towards the end, I always ask, a bunch of fun questions. And I've already asked, I've already, kind of weaved in the first one, which is your favorite video game. But, extending onto that, what's your platform of choice? Like, is it console, PC, is it PS5, Xbox? What is it and why?
I think it depends because I really like sitting on the couch with my fiance and just playing games together and talking through them, pausing every now and then and discussing what it is that we just experienced and whether it was cool or whether it was dumb. From that intellectual level and like the comfort of just sitting back on your couch, I really enjoy just like playing on a console, and that would be usually PlayStation 5 that I'll like be doing lately. I haven't owned an Xbox since the first Xbox. I was a little sore because I bought an Xbox and then the Xbox 360 came out like a month later. So I was
You're at
like,
the
"Oh,
tail end.
no, I resent them." It had a very short shelf life,
Yes,
but
Xbox does.
I hear the Xbox Series X is really good as well. And from a development standpoint, it provides a lot of hardware and options for people. I like developing on all of the different consoles. The Switch is very hard. It's challenging because you really have to figure out. You have to, if you're going to make a game on the Switch, you have to design for the Switch. You have to
Mhm.
think about how your game is going to be played on the Switch. So I actually do enjoy playing mobile games as well. So I have a Steam Deck and the Switch, and I like thinking about how the UI can work for a mobile game versus a console game. Those are interesting challenges. So I really play on everything, And on PC, I play a significant amount as well because it's such a versatile platform, and you could do shooters, and you get the freedom of using mouse look whenever you're playing like an immersive sim, um, or
The
like a
customization as well, the modding. Because on
yeah,
console, outside of a select few games that are geared for modding, you can't really do much. Whereas on PC, you
exactly.
can pretty much mod anything
Yeah,
if you
and
wanted to.
I haven't modded things as much over the years. Like as the time has gone on, I tend to be so busy
I know what you
working on games
mean.
and like
Life.
checking out. Yeah, like I'll check out a new game for like maybe 2 hours, and then I'll be like, yeah, I'm good, I'm done, and then I'll move on to the next game because there's just so many that come out.
Yeah.
Um, but so I won't have time to mod them, but like the flexibility is there and the accessibility features are there. Um, and if you're playing a game like an immersive sim or something, having mouse look is crucial.
Oh
By
yeah.
comparison, I wouldn't play a racing game on PC unless I had like a steering wheel because I really just I want to have a controller.
Mm.
So I'll just sit back on the couch and play on controller on PlayStation 5 or something.
I mean, that reminds me of a story, when I used to, and even now, if I play on PC, I actually love playing racing games with a keyboard. Like
Really?
Need for Speed, or, obviously you got Forza on there now as well.
I've
As
heard
a
of a lot of people that like played like Need for Speed 1 and 2 with a keyboard and now they swear by it and I don't understand.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm one of the again. I still play,
Sure.
games on all sorts of console systems like yourself, and most of my gaming nowadays is spent on console because it is more just turning on, an hour of gaming is going to be an hour of gaming versus on PC maybe a bit of setup,
Yeah,
updates, Windows, or all of that other stuff. So because of the less time I have now, I definitely do spend more time on consoles if I'm going to. But yeah, like as a kid when I would play Need for Speed Carbon, Need for Speed Most Wanted. I would love just using the arrows. Like I'm not a WASD guy because I have the mouse on my
mhm.
left, side. I'm not left-handed, even though a lot of people ask, me, am I left-handed because I have my mouse on the left. It's just because my dad, is left-handed and he always had it on the left, and I
Oh,
never switched it over. And I'm better at using my mouse on with my left hand than I am with my right, even though I'm right-handed, for
that's
that very
interesting.
reason.
That's very cool.
Yeah. And obviously as a result, because WASD is so close to the mouse, if your mouse is on the left, my dad, because he used to be a gamer, he used to use the arrow keys. Naturally, I use the arrow keys and I use similar,
Ah,
configuration as he did. But yeah, my mouse, I'm looking at it now, my setup, it's still on the left hand side. Like it's always on the left hand side. If I go to a library or if I would go to like the computer labs at uni, I would always move it from the right to the left if I was going to be there for more than 5-10 minutes. If I wasn't, because I'm right-handed, I can use it with a right hand fine. But
sure.
definitely, I would never play a game unless it's maybe like a chess, the turn-based game, or otherwise it would have to be with the left hand. And but yeah,
Yeah.
that's just a little tidbit about me in terms of left and right-handed with the keyboard and mouse. But as a result, because a lot of gaming mice are right-handed, I usually just end up, the part where the thumb is, sort of curved out. I usually just wedge the ring finger and my little finger into that. So that's how I've got used to, playing games and using a computer, wedging my fingers into that instead of
I
using the mouse with my thumb.
I had wondered, like, I was gonna ask, like, do you struggle to find left-handed
No,
mice?
I
And
mean,
it's
I did look at one point,
uh-huh.
and because most now it's a bit better than when I was a kid, like
Yeah.
15 years ago. But even now, like you can get so many different mice. The route that they've gone down is more that okay, you'll just get a mouse that works on both sides. It's just
Yeah.
symmetrical, but then the button configuration is not symmetrical. You'll still probably have buttons on the left side of the mouse which are more geared for the thumb on your right hand, most likely for a gaming mouse. But in terms of comfortability, it's fine. But like I said, I got used to it, and I'll get used to whatever mouse I'm on using. That I can use it with the left hand. That's not really much of an issue. But yeah, going back to the keyboard thing with the racing game, I don't know what it was. I used to just love it. I think it was partly because when I was a kid, when you're playing on PC, you can pirate. I used to do a lot of piracy when I was a kid, and so I was able to get loads of games, even though I had consoles. Trying to persuade my parents to buy a game was more of an endeavor than me just pirating the game and persuading them to buy me a pack of 25 or 50 CD or DVDs, playing one. So
Yeah. It was the
also,
2000s.
yes, so but on top of that, I did want a controller for my PC, but unlike now where you can just get your Xbox or PlayStation controller and plug it in with a cable and the drivers installed and you can just plug and play and get it to work on PC. Back then, you couldn't plug your PS2 controller in. Like
Yeah, you
you
couldn't.
needed specific PC game controllers, and it was, am I gonna persuade my parents to buy me a Logitech game controller versus buying a console game, because it literally is one or the other when I can get them to do it.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, I'll just get used to keyboard and mouse, and I was already used to because I had been playing PC games since I was, just not that old at all, like a few years old. My dad is a PC gamer, not a console gamer. So like FPS, Half-Life, strategy games, those sort of games, fine. But when it came to racing, I really wanted a controller, but because I, couldn't, afford it, I got used to it. But as a result, I really enjoyed it. And now, if I have it on PC, like a game like Forza Horizon, I'm trying to think, what are they on? Horizon 5, I think was the latest one, or 6? Was it
I
5 was the latest one?
think so. I think it might be 5.
Yeah, I think so. And I think they got Forza Motorsport either just come out or is coming out. And because I had it on Game Pass, and you get that on PC as well, so I downloaded it on PC as
Ah,
well. Even though I've got an Xbox controller, I've got a PlayStation controller, I can plug them in now and actually play them. I opted for the keyboard because I'm so used to it and I love it. It is one of those things that you've got to really have a passion for it. Otherwise, you'll just revert to a controller. I used to love it for
definitely.
playing drift on like Need for Speed, the old Need for Speed, doing
Mm,
drift with the arrow keys, just switching back and forth, left and right. It was so much quicker than using the arrow because you could basically have a finger on left and right and just dedicated fingers and just go, just flicking between them.
mhm. I could see that. I could see
Yeah.
that.
But yeah, but you mentioned that you've got a Steam Deck. What's your opinion on Steam Deck? How have you been finding it?
I really like the Steam Deck, but I worry about its longevity. It sounds like Valve is looking at releasing a more powerful Steam Deck down the line, which makes sense. I think that answers that question of that's what they plan, is that the Steam Deck that we have now will eventually be slightly out of date and won't be able to play contemporary games, so they'll need to release a more powerful one, which is
Mm.
fine. I think that makes sense. Games continue to grow in like the resources that they require, and right now like there's only so much you can do with the hardware that the Steam Deck has. But it's great for playing a lot of titles like indie games and uh, virtual visual novels and
Or
uh,
10-year-old games, like
10-year-old
games that
games.
are
Like, yeah,
a
you've
bit
got a
older.
backlog. Like, I think that Valve hit on the nail on the head in that they're like, people have Steam libraries of hundreds of games they have never
Yes.
played and that are very old. Let's give them a console that can basically play all of them. That makes a lot of sense because they're adding value to the Steam library.
They
They are
are.
trying to find ways to enhance it. That is a really good business decision, I think, and I really like it as a product. I like that it is fairly easy to optimize for because they are pretty much all the same. And so you can just detect, okay, this person's on Steam. Ah, they're on a Steam Deck. Well, I know what the settings for the Steam Deck are as a developer, so I can set them up automatically the way that they're going to best have the best gameplay experience. And if they want to change them, they can.
Oh yeah,
That's
like
really nice from a flexible standpoint.
yeah, definitely the Steam Deck. What they've done, and you hit the nail on the head. There is that that library that every PC gamer has. Anyone that's been a PC gamer long enough will have a huge Steam library. I think
Mhm.
I've probably got over 1,000 games on there. A lot of them were via. what was that service
Like
called that you
Humble
would.
Bundle and
Yes.
yeah, yeah.
I was thinking, what's it called? Green Man Gaming was coming to mind. I was like,
Also,
it's not Green Man Gaming. Yeah, Humble Bundle. I stopped subscribing to Humble Bundle like 2, 3 years ago because I was like, I'm spending this money. It's not too much, but I'm spending this money, and yeah, I'm getting loads of games, and
I
they're
don't blame
increasing my Steam library, but I'm not playing any of them.
you. Hmm.
But yeah, I've
The
got
money
this.
is going to charity. That is nice.
Yeah, no, it is. But then I'm like, am I? If I'm not playing any of the games, should I just give to charity directly? Because of
Yeah.
probably more of it will go to it, etc., etc. But yeah, like having these huge Steam libraries and then playing a game that's like 10 years old, you can max it out. Also, because it's on a smaller screen, you don't need to have some super high resolution. It's a small screen, it still looks good. I've been playing like GTA 4, Max Payne 3, pretty
Yeah.
much all maxed out. There's like a couple of settings, you have to tone down, especially like anti-aliasing, and they still look great today. Like they
Yeah.
still look good, they still feel good, and it's an enjoyable experience. I had played those games back in the day anyway, so they're not new to me, but it's just a great way of reliving them because I probably wouldn't play them unless they did a remaster of those games because they're a
Exactly.
bit dated and I don't have the time if I'm sitting on my you know my sofa. Like I actually have a dock for the Steam Deck, and I tried Max Payne 3 connected up to my 65-inch TV, and you know what? It feels like it did on PS3. That's why I probably wouldn't, or looks like it does,
Yeah.
as it did on my PS3. A bit better because it's on PC, but that's probably why I wouldn't gravitate towards playing it. Whereas on Steam Deck, it still looks amazing. It still looks like, oh, it's like a new game that's just come out, and to be able to experience these games, is great. But like you said, they do need a more powerful one. That's clearly where they're, going to be going to compete with the likes of, the ROG
Eventually.
Ally.
Like I don't even think they need one now. Like
No, I mean they've
you
got the
can play
Steam
a
Deck
lot of games.
OLEDs that's just come out as well.
Yeah, and that one is going to be fine for several years. Even after, you'll still be able to play a lot of the games that you have on Steam. Everything on my Steam library, I can probably play on the Steam Deck. Maybe some at 30 frames per second. But the
It,
problem is going to
it's
be like
capable, yes.
yeah, when every game is as technically challenging as Alan Wake 2, that's when it becomes a problem.
Yeah, yeah, but that's when they'll have a more powerful version. But what I would like to see from just a gamer perspective is two versions. One, how it is now, that is clearly not that powerful, but because it's Steam and Valve, it's optimized and it works well, and you can play a lot of games. But then like a more pro version that is going head to head with like the ROG Ally and some of the Neo consoles, and yeah, you're maxing out Alan Wake on that resolution. You're maxing out Cyberpunk. You're maxing out Crisis. You're maxing out all these top tier games. But again, you're paying closer to the £1,000 or $1,000 mark. But then you have that option of that $300-400 version where, yeah, all the old games will work fine, all the indie games, and the newer games on the lowest setting with some, the scaling as well. Will probably work as well. And I think that will be great for, consumers, having
You
those
know,
two there.
I
You
disagree.
disagree?
I disagree. I
Okay.
think what's good for consumers is not always what they think is good for them. um,
That is true as
and
well.
and I think that there's two reasons that I think that the model that Valve is using right now works. One is there is only one. There's one Steam Deck, which means that developers can focus on, I'm going to release a game on PC. I'm going to have all these flags. I want people to be able to play it on Steam Deck. Let me figure out what the best settings are on Steam Deck. Done. That makes it really, because it's already on Steam. They don't have to think about it. The game will just run on the Steam Deck. They can just boot it up and figure out what the best settings are and then set them up in a config file. So that lowers the barrier to entry for developers. It lowers the barrier of entry for consumers because they know if something is Steam Deck verified, that means it probably runs fine and it's great and playable on the Steam Deck, and they don't have to worry about it. They can just play it. So they have lowered the barrier for both the developer and the consumer. And the challenge then is like when you get two options when you're like, okay, do I get the iPhone 14 or do I get the iPhone 14 Pro? You run into the problem of like, which do I need? Which do I want? There's a common phenomenon that was de- there was an experiment done by a jam company years ago where they were trying to figure out, okay, we want to sell jam to consumers and we want to figure out how do we get consumers to buy our jam. And so they set up different experimental stalls. And one of them had like hundreds of jams. It was just like all of the jams you could possibly want. And another one had like five jams. And they saw so many more sales from the five jam setup because it was very easy to look at them and be like, I want that one. Whereas when you have hundreds of jams, hundreds of options, you it's much more difficult to make a choice. So the same thing applies to the human brain whenever they need to pick between one thing or another. I can buy the Steam Deck Pro or I can buy the Steam Deck Normal. Which one do I want? I don't know. One of them has different features, one of them is better. Right now, the three tiers of Steam Deck are just the same hardware across the board. One of them has more space and
Yeah.
maybe the glass. And
Yeah,
that's it.
yeah, like the screen is, yeah,
Yeah.
like yeah, the glass, but they are
So
technically the same.
yeah. Yeah, exactly. So they've lowered the barrier to entry for developers. They've lowered the barrier of entry for consumers, and they've lowered the barrier of entry for purchasers. This is probably the smartest decision from a business standpoint for Valve. It maybe if you had more choices, you could max out and compete with other platforms. But I think what Valve is saying with their decisions is that they don't think they need to compete because what they are offering is an attractive enough proposition on its own that people are going to want the Steam Deck over the other ones. It's just
Mm.
better for them.
Yeah, I mean, I do, see where you're coming from, and that study of the general, I've heard about similar studies of, products in a supermarket, and like obviously when they have less choice, just a little bit of choice, but not too much. The brain isn't overwhelmed, and
Yeah.
it's better for the consumer. That they feel like that they've made the right decision because they don't have all these alternatives in their head of, oh, should I have had those are the 500 jams because they may have been better. Where if there's only two, a few, you're just like, yeah, two of the flavors definitely wasn't for me, and the other two, yeah, I wasn't quite sure about the packaging. So yeah, this is the one I'm going for.
Yeah.
So
It's
yeah,
do I want it or not? And that makes
yeah.
it a lot easier.
Mm, what I have, from my standpoint with the Steam Deck, if they go for a Pro model, they're obviously going to increase the price. Like that's or like a more powerful version. Like
Yeah.
that's more in line with how ROG Ally is to the in terms of today. Even if it's in 2 years, it's of that caliber for then. They're gonna have to increase the price inevitably unless they somehow get super crazy economy of scale or they're willing to just take a loss on the console, their hardware side, which I don't think they will, not
Yeah.
to this extent. If they increase the price, then you either price out people that can't or won't pay seven, eight, 900 or $1,000, or you do that other option where you have the lower one and you have the higher one. But it will be interesting, what they do. But what I do like is that it is definitely Valve that has made a lot of companies look back at the portable market and not think of it as iPhone and Android and as
Yes.
dedicated game systems, and on top of that affordable ones as well, because some of those other ones, even before ROG Ally, before Steam Deck, you would get ones that were like $1,500. I can't remember. There's one particular one that comes to mind. I can't remember what it was called again, but it was super expensive, well over $1,000, over £1,000. And yeah, it was powerful because it was basically a Ryzen CPU, put in there like 16 gigs of RAM and flash storage, but it was expensive. At that point, you can almost buy a nice gaming machine. And yeah,
Yeah.
obviously it's not portable, but it is that thing of where do you want to put your money for the average person. But here, you have a very compelling system. And on top of that, like I said, you could get away with never buying a game or not buying a game dedicated for your Steam Deck for a long time because your Steam library, or you're going to buy a PC game anyway that you can play it on PC. You could dock it. There's definitely a lot of possibility with the Steam Deck. I want to make a quick prediction. I feel like if a Valve plays this right and a bit of luck goes in their favor, in 10 to 15 years, the kids that are coming up today, they might see the Steam Deck or Valve hardware consoles the way they see PlayStation and Xbox. I feel like
Yeah.
that might be a very real thing. I know Steam didn't. Steam failed with the Steam Box, their other Steam machines, and Steam Link. But I feel like Steam Deck and some of the VR stuff has hit the nail on the head, and it is like it's hard to think, but in 10 to 15 years, Xbox, PlayStation, or Nintendo, one of them might be the Atari or Sega that they're like, oh yeah, they did a system back in the day. Like I
Yeah.
like my parents speak about it, but to me, it's the Steam Deck or the Steam console,
Yeah.
and that would be
Absolutely.
crazy. Like it's crazy to think that might be the thing. I feel like it won't be Nintendo that will get knocked out, even though there is, even though they
Nintendo
have
makes a different kind. They don't make.
yes.
Yeah, they don't make consoles for other people to make games on. Nintendo makes
No,
consoles for their own games.
they do. Like it is predominantly their own, IPs or IPs that they have a close relationship with,
Yeah.
of some sort, and that's where Nintendo's strengths lie. But whereas obviously PlayStation, Xbox, they're going head to head. It is definitely for many gamers out there. Do I get a PlayStation or do I get an Xbox?
Yeah.
Rarely do I ever hear somebody say, "Do I get a PS5 or do I get a Switch?" It's okay. I've got a PS5. I can afford a Switch now. I wouldn't mind playing the new Mario. Wouldn't mind playing the new Zelda. I'll get that. Or
Sure.
I've got a Switch, or my kids got a Switch. I wouldn't mind a PlayStation 5 or Xbox. I'll get that. Like it is a matter of okay, one of these and then a Switch, and that's
Yeah.
something. Or the Wii. When the Wii was out, it was like okay, I'll have a PS3, but I'll also have a Wii. It's that fun
Sure.
console, and
Yeah, yeah.
it's a great position for Nintendo to be in. But yeah, that's definitely not what Steam Deck is or Valve is going for. Even though it's portable, it is more PlayStation and Xbox. And another thing I love about Steam Deck is the emulation, like playing PS2 games, Xbox game, GameCube, all the emulation side of it as well, because you can play those games at good settings, and you can experience all that portable. That's that to me is also crazy.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So yeah, before we wrap up, just a quick few rapid fire, fun questions. We talk about favorite video game, favorite board game, and favorite movie.
My favorite board game is probably Eldritch Horror. I really like uh, co-op multiplayer board games. There's very few single player board games. There are some, but I really like how it's kind of uh, twists on players depending on which scenario you're in and changes the rules. And there's a lot of tension that's built into the game. I think it's really neat. I think it's a great experience. It's just a bit of a time investment. My favorite movie is probably not it's a movie. I feel it's a movie. It would be Bo Burnham's Inside. It's
Okay.
a comedy musical special
Okay.
on Netflix, and it is both beautiful and depressing. And it was came out in 2020 when all of us were trapped inside, and it really reflects a lot of complex relationships with people and media, and it's really fantastic.
Okay. I mean, that's something I'll have to have a look at. It's not one that I've heard of. So, what video game are you looking forward to? We talk about favorite video games, but there must be games that you are looking forward to playing.
Oh my god, I don't know because I have no idea what's going to come out. Every game that everyone was waiting for came out this year, and now it's just who even knows? Who
Yeah.
knows what's going to come next? I think I'm interested in seeing what Naughty Dog comes up with next.
Yes.
I'm interested
Everyone
in
wants Last of Us 2 multiplayer, and this.
everybody wants Last of Us 2. I think it's going to be several years before we get another Zelda game. I think I'm really interested in a lot of the indie space in particular. I'm interested in seeing Hades 2 and how that plays out. I want to see other indie studios come out with new ideas, and kind of challenge a lot of what we've seen in the AAA space, which is like all of the open world games with all of the collection and superheroes and fighting. I want to see more concentrated narrative experiences, that push the envelope in storytelling without needing to also be an open world collection game with a ton of side missions. I want shorter games that are more emotionally impactful, that I'm actually going to finish.
Mhm.
So I'm looking forward to whatever comes out of that.
Okay, and final question, two-parter. Does money buy you happiness, and what does a good life mean to you?
Does money buy you happiness? Contrary to popular belief, money buys you stability, and that can lead to happiness. I think that no, being super mega rich doesn't make you happy, but being wealthy enough to be able to not think about where your next paycheck is coming from is more important than people think. And I think that the current capitalist system that we live in is really not conducive to people living stable, like mentally healthy lives. Because a lot of people are living minimum wage, paycheck to paycheck. And I don't think that's okay. I think governments need to do something about the huge financial divide between lower income workers and the middle class and the upper class, a very dwindling middle class that we have across all developed nations, where honestly programmers make a ton of money and a lot of other people don't. I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's okay. I would don't need to make tons of money to be happy. I just need enough to be able to not think about where my next paycheck is coming from and be able to save up for things that I care about. And I think that more of us should be able to do that. It doesn't make sense the way that like our economic system is structured.
Okay,
So
that's very interesting.
yeah,
Very
no,
interesting.
I think that like people that are chasing after the millions don't need the millions. They just need to be happy. They just need enough to be able to survive. They will find happiness. So if you're chasing clout because you think that being a millionaire will make you happy, don't. Just chase whatever is going to make you stable. That is where you will find real happiness. And the second question that you asked, what was it?
What does a good life mean to you? I think you basically touched on that anyway.
A good life, yeah, a good life is stability, is being around people that you love and can socialize with and can that care about you and that you can care about them. It is about finding a place where you belong, and it is being able to do things that are meaningful. I think that everybody in their life is looking for meaning. They're looking for purpose. It doesn't really matter what you do, as long as you feel like it's meaningful and that it is leaving a lasting legacy. And that's what everybody's searching for. The reason that I make games is because I want to leave something behind that impacts people and touches people. That's my definition of a good life. But I know people who are parents and their legacy that they're leaving behind are their kids. I know people who are doctors, the legacy they leave behind are their patients. I think you should do whatever you feel is going to leave behind the legacy that you care about.
I think that's a fantastic way to end it. Loved your opinions on the does money buy you happiness. That it's not as the way people think it is of money is the root of all evil, and the money does not buy you happiness. There's you know you need enough to be comfortable, and that's something to
Yeah, money buys
definitely.
food, man.
Yeah,
Money
I
buys
know money
rent.
buys shelter, money buys like it's something that I think about definitely a lot now. I mean, I used to always, but especially now that I'm a father, is that there's times where I love just playing with my daughter, and we go out, and but I know it's because of money, whether it's because I know I've got money saved up or money coming in that I can do it even if I'm not spending money, and then that moment is happy and I'm not worrying about money as much, or it is directly I'm spending money. Like I'm taking her
Yeah,
to some sort of play group, and even if it's not a lot of money, I'm still spending it. I'm able to buy her, some overpriced food there, which at a place where you can't take your own food instead of trying to sneak it in. I definitely know
yeah,
maybe not to her. She probably doesn't really care much for it, especially now because she's only a year and a half. But I know myself, especially when I was growing up, those sort of concerns around money and saving money, pennies, where we could, like that's definitely something that makes me happy. Having that there, that like I said, I can be comfortable and do the small things and enjoy those things instead of thinking, oh,
Exactly.
I have to spend this £5, or I shouldn't spend this £5, and
Yeah,
there's still.
stressing over
Mhm.
small things. It's
Yes,
just
and
not
there's
healthy.
like I don't mind stressing over it and making a sacrifice on me, but with my family, I like having the money to be able to spend it on them, especially my kids, and
Absolutely.
seeing them happy. So I was like, yeah, it's fine. I'll have a little less, but making sure that the kids are all right and they can enjoy themselves. That's definitely something that makes me happy. And again, I'm not oblivious to the fact that it's directly the result of having money.
Yeah. I'm sure you know about homeostasis, right?
Yes.
So there's a psychological concept. I forget the name of the psychologist that proposed it, but there's this kind of like equivalent idea of homeostasis in happiness. We as creatures have a certain level, a threshold at which we are comfortable, or at which we have received enough happiness, um, and we crave that satisfaction, that good feeling, and we get it through a number of different ways. So you get it from being able to spend money on yourself. You get it from being able to be around friends and family. You get it around finding a sense of purpose in your religious organization, or if you're a volunteer in your volunteer organization, or if you're part of a studio, of being part of that studio, that gives you a sense of satisfaction. So we try to fill up this bucket of satisfaction in our lives, and different things will fill it up and different things will drain it. But the problem is, when people run out, like they don't have enough of the resources to fill that bucket up to the certain threshold, they start to make up other ways to be able to get that satisfaction. So things like drinking, things like drug abuse, things like, risky, unprotected sex, things like, taking risks or driving really fast. Those are ways to cope with the fact that we are not receiving the happiness and the satisfaction that we need in our lives. And that means that anybody who is in a position where they don't feel stable, they don't feel like they have enough money, and they feel like they are constantly struggling to make ends meet, are in a place where they're more likely to fall to needing to fill up that threshold with other things, because nobody can live below that threshold. Our bodies can't handle it, our brains can't handle it. So we make up the difference. This is something that is an integral systemic problem in our society. And
And well
that's why
documented as well. Like it's not
yeah,
obviously a new concept. It's something that people and scientists and governments know that you know you need to raise people to a minimum level. Obviously, part of that is them themselves raising them, because you can give them all the money they want, all the resources and
yeah,
opportunities. But
people
some
can
people,
make bad decisions, sure.
yeah, and be lazy. But again, it is about having a baseline, and that solves a lot of problems
It really
internally, but
does.
also externally, in terms of crime, in terms
Mhm.
of economy. Like, it solves a lot of issues. So I feel like we're on the same point of either some sort of universal basic income, or something that
Something.
elevates people's baseline to where they have a more even. Again, it's not going to be fully even, and I don't think that's necessarily too much of an issue. But like a decent starting point,
Yeah.
and after that, yeah, it's up to them.
Yeah, I agree.
So yeah, that is it, folks, for this week's episode of FireDEV. Really enjoyed the conversation with Andres today. Thank you very much for coming on. Obviously, talking about your experience at small studios, big studios. Obviously, talking a bit about these philosophical conversations as well, and then the general gaming side. It was really fun talking to you. So, Andres, thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
No problem. So thank you, everyone, and I'll see you all in next week's episode of FireDev. Bye bye.